This is a WRTV breaking news update.
And we are joining you in the middle of programming to bring to you the verdict in the Delphi double murder case, the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. The jury in Delphi has just delivered their verdict. It was read to the court, and we do want to pass that along to you, what we've learned in just the last couple of moments here. Richard Allen, the prime suspect in this case, has been found guilty on all counts. Richard Allen has been found guilty of the murder of Libby German, guilty of murder while kidnapping of Libby German. He's been found guilty for the murder of Abigail Williams, and the jury also returned a guilty verdict in the charge of murder while kidnapping of Abigail Williams. The jury has spent what is much over the last 4 days, with a break from Sunday, talking about the evidence in this case, poring over all the details that were presented to them by the prosecution and the defense in this, and finally, within the last hour, returned that guilty verdict, guilty on all charges for Richard Allen. We do have an expert with us here in studio to give us some perspective about what this means, what the jury went through over the last several days, and what this means for the case moving forward. So with me now is Courtney Benson-Coy, a criminal justice attorney. Thanks for being here with us. So guilty on all counts for Richard Allen. As you followed this case, was this a surprise to you, and why or why not?
I am surprised, actually. From what I was hearing, did not think that there was enough evidence to get beyond a reasonable doubt. But the jury, did their job. They deliberated for a long time. We don't know exactly what went on in that courtroom. So I am surprised, but I stand by the jury's verdict. The
prosecution laid out a lot of what was called circumstantial evidence, and what was missing there was the DNA evidence, which has become so key in high-profile and murder cases like this. And so that circumstantial evidence that was laid out, you feel like, in your expert opinion, maybe not have been enough for a conviction?
And again, I'm just going by what I've seen and heard. What actually happens in the courtroom is a lot different than what we see and hear out in the public. So,
as you watch the case, what stuck out to you as far as this has to be a questionable, reasonable doubt?
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of direct evidence pointing directly to Richard Allen. I did not see any witness come and say this. I saw Richard Allen there in that area at that time. The forensics I'm a little skeptical of. But those are the things that kind of stuck out to me.
Okay. Well, we're going to keep you here for a little bit as we go back and forth, and we're going to catch up with our Caitlin Kendall, who is live in Delphi, has been covering this case very closely, not just the trial, but the case itself, as they searched for a suspect in this case, as police announced they made an arrest, and now following every step of the way, listening to all the testimony, and waiting as the jury poured over all this evidence. Caitlin, tell us what you're hearing there and what you've learned here in the last couple of hours.
Mark, after about 19 hours of deliberating for the jury, they found Richard Allen guilty on all 4 charges in the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. More than 7.5 years of waiting for the family of Abby and Libby. And I can tell you, when the verdict was read, everyone was crying, both Richard Allen's family and Abby and Libby's family. Many members of Libby's family kind of saying yes when that first count of guilty verdict was read. Those 4 charges: count 1, felony murder, found guilty on all 4 counts. Count 1, felony murder for the death of Abigail Williams. Count 2, felony murder for the death of Liberty German. Count 3 for the killing of Abigail Williams, and count 4 for the killing of Liberty German. Something the family has been waiting for 7.5 years to hear. When the verdict was read, the family, as I just mentioned, started crying, started hugging each other, and just as the family was about to leave after the jury read their verdict, it only took a couple of minutes for that to be read. Many of the family members were hugging investigators. Investigators were crying, the prosecution team was crying, but they also were smiling. These were obvious happy tears. It's a lot. It's a lot for this family to be dealing with for all of this time, waiting 19 hours or so to hear that verdict. And after the verdict was read, the defense team actually asked for a roll call from every single one of the jury members to confirm that it was their belief that Richard Allen was to be found guilty on all 4 charges. The entire 12-person jury answered the judge saying yes, that was their verdict. Now, when it was read, Richard Allen's family They were seen crying. Richard Allen's wife could not get up. She sat in her chair. She couldn't get up. Richard Allen's mother also struggling to stand up, having to be held up by family members, and even parts of the defense team were wrapping their arms around the Allen family. As for Richard Allen himself, he was sitting down, showed no emotion when that verdict was read, emotionless the entire time as all 4 counts were read in this case against him. Now, prosecutor Nicholas McLeland laid out a timeline from February 13th of 2017, and in that timeline, the prosecutor told the jury that Richard Allen put himself on the trail that day. They said that Richard Allen, when he was confessing more than 60 times, had information that only the killer would know. And they said in those confessions, Richard Allen was detailing what happened in this crime. And there also was that bullet found at the crime scene. The jury ultimately siding with the prosecution. The expert witness for the prosecution saying that the bullet found at the crime scene between Abby and Libby's bodies had been cycled through Richard Allen's gun. The defense said it was an untrusted science, but of course the jury deciding that it should be trusted, and I'm sure that's one of the pieces of evidence the jury considered. A number of phone call interviews, a number of video of Richard Allen inside of his cell that the defense said he was mentally unwell. The jury deciding otherwise. Again, the family escorted out together, but all of the family just kind of holding each other today. And it's a bit of a celebration for those family members of Abby and Libby. And of course, very hard for Richard Allen's family to understand that Richard Allen is going to be sentenced and found guilty on all 4 charges. His sentencing is set for December, later in December, where he will be sentenced on all 4 of those charges. But again, Richard Allen has been found guilty on all 4 counts in the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. Mark.
Caitlin, you had a chance to be in the courtroom as this verdict was being read, and you said that you watched Richard Allen as well. What happened with Richard Allen after these verdicts were read, and what was his demeanor again? Tell us what happened to him and where he was taken.
His demeanor, Mark, has kind of been the same throughout this entire trial. He hasn't really shown any emotion. He's been kind of expressionless, if you will. When the verdict was being read, it was much of the same. He sat there with his defense attorney, Andrew Baldwin, was rubbing the back of his head and was patting him on the back. But Richard Allen showed no emotion himself. And so it's kind of what we've seen come from Richard Allen throughout this entire trial. After that happened, Richard Allen was then handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom as his family watched that happen and as Abby and Libby's family watched that happen.
And Caitlin, I know on Friday many people had signs both in support of Richard Allen, support for the families of Abby and Libby. What's been the reaction? I know you've just stepped outside, but just from the people around the courthouse there you posted there was a long line of people just today again.
Yeah, there was 100 people or so wanting an opportunity to head inside of the courthouse. I was one of the lucky ones who got a chance to step inside, but stepping out, it's a lot of emotions. A lot of people from Richard Allen's arrest believe that police had the wrong guy. Ultimately, the jury deciding that was not the case. But many people thought that there was just circumstantial evidence. It wasn't enough to convict Richard Allen, but the jury thought otherwise. Despite circumstantial evidence or not, the jury thought that the prosecution had enough to convict Richard Allen.
Caitlin, do you know if the families will be speaking at all to the media today?
We do not know. I had an opportunity to just sort of hug the family of Abby and Libby both when they were heading out of the courtroom, and they're crying happy tears. I think it's a lot of emotions for either side to grapple with, whether it's Richard Allen's family, who now knows he's going to be convicted for up to 130 years, or Abby and Libby's family that can kind of start this next path and this journey of healing. So we do not know if the family's going to speak, but of course, if they do, we'll make sure that we bring it to you guys.
All right, our Caitlin Kendall Live will be checking in with you stay close and as we get updates here. I do want to return to our guest here, Courtney. If we can go back over these charges that the jury had to consider. And some of our viewers have been questioning what was the difference between the murder of each girl and then murder while kidnapping of each girl. What is the distinction there, and why was that so important and a tool for prosecutors to use?
So the difference is that the murder counts is a knowing and intentional killing. Felony murder is just that a death happened in the commission of a felony, so that there was a kidnapping and a death happened in commission of that felony. But because he's been found guilty of all 4 counts, those felony counts will probably merge with the murder counts.
And I know we talked about those confession tapes, hearing him, the jury, how much do you really think that weighed on their decision, actually hearing it in his words that he did it?
I'm sure it weighed heavily on their decision, and given the amount of times, as well as hearing it in his own voice, I'm sure that weighed heavily in their decision.
What comes next in a case like this? We know sentencing, but of course we're probably expecting them to appeal as well.
Correct. So once Mr. Allen is sentenced, he will then get his appellate rights read to him by the judge, and he will likely have indigent counsel appointed if he can't afford an attorney to represent him. He has that absolute right to appeal.